just want to make sure. Perfect. Okay, so welcome everyone to Black History Month virtual lecture series. My name is Meredith, and I'm going to start off with our land acknowledgement. So the County of Simcoe acknowledges that the land on which we gather today is the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Nation, which includes the Ojibwe, Ottawa, and Potawatomi nations, collectively known as the Three Fires Confederacy. We also recognize the Huron-Wendat who occupied these lands prior to the middle of the 17th century. We embrace the enduring presence and partnership of the Indigenous peoples of this region, including the Chippewa Tri-Council First Nations, comprised of the Bosley First Nations, the Chippewas, Arama, and the Georgina Island First Nation. We would also like to recognize the diverse Métis and Inuit communities within our region. The County of Simcoe is dedicated to honoring our Indigenous history and culture and is committed to coming together to learn, heal, and create future prosperity, respect, and understanding in all of our communities. Now, for the Black History Month virtual lecture series, we do have a trigger warning. So the following content may contain graphic details about potentially slavery, violence, abuse, or dehumanization, which can be triggering for some participants. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to start by introducing our speaker today. So Ruth is a Black political feminist and seasoned public speaker whose scholarship sits at the intersection of feminist theory, politics, and justice. Her work interrogates the structures of power and oppression that shape the lived experiences of marginalized communities in the global South, particularly women in Sub-Saharan Africa. She is currently an assistant professor of Black feminisms at Memorial University of Newfoundland, located in the Mi'kmaq Mi'kmaq, yeah, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq and Beothuk peoples. Her growing body of work includes the monograph Transitional Justice in Africa, the Case of Zimbabwe, and the co-edited volume of the PhD Experience in African Higher Education. Ruth also contributes thought-provoking essays to platforms such as Kujenga Amani, Africa as a Country, and Herizons, among others. A former board member of the Zimbabwe Peace Project and the African Studies Association, Ruth is a committed scholar activist who works to advance holistic peace and development, both within academia and in broader society. She holds research and affiliations with the Harriet Tubman Institute and the Center for Feminist Research. Her long-term project, Humanizing African Women Movements, brings together diverse Black artists to build a digital repository of research creations that represent women's resistance to the geographies of violence shaping their everyday lives. So obviously Ruth is very accomplished, so I'm very excited to present Ruth. So Ruth, you begin.
Thank you so much, Meredith, for this opportunity, and warm welcome to everybody who has set aside time to commune with me. I'm hoping to make today an exploratory exercise as the work I would be speaking to is really, a form of project that I'm still at its conception stage, but it really builds on from work that I have been doing for a couple of years. And now that I'm positioned here in Canada, I find more resonance with that work. Hence, I bring this conversation here as a way to sift through the ideas that I'm working with, but also to give an invitation for feedback and even for people who are interested to call in with me on this journey to really join me. I think it's always a great way for me when I introduce the subject matter to position myself within the community that I will be engaging with, such that you understand more about who I am and the ideas and practices and value system that informs, the things that I may say or share as we go along in our conversations today. I think as a way of situating myself, I am an African Indigenous person who originally was born in Zimbabwe. As you can see on the map, it's a country in Southern Africa. which is a former British colony. I'll share a little bit more about that in a second. But the images you are seeing there, I have deliberately chosen them as my way of positioning myself and introducing my story, such that you can really see me for who I am and what has natured the person that you are interacting with. The small image, or the image of a small baby you see there, is none other than myself, who is a born-free. I form part of the born-free generation, in the sense that I was born after Zimbabwe gained independence from British colonial rule. So I was born after 1980. Well, they always say a woman's age is a secret, but at least mine is out there. The picture behind that one of a baby is actually the home, or the hut, in which I was born. As you can see in the image, I'm actually seated next to my aunt, which is my mother's sister. My aunt was actually a midwife, in the sense that when my mother delivered, she was assisted by her sister, as well as another bigger aunt, which was a neighbor to my mother's homestead. So in terms of where I was born in Buhera, which is a community in Manicaland province in Zimbabwe. As I said, as a snapshot of where Zimbabwe is, so that you can then understand some of the ideas I'll be sharing today. It is a country located in Southern Africa, a former British colony, currently sitting with about 16.3 million people. In terms of population composition, it's largely comprised of the Bantu indigenous people, who speak a multitude of languages, though officially, in terms of medium of instruction, we tend to use English, Shona, and Ndebele, but we have actually 16 languages that are recognized within the Constitution. But importantly, we also embody very dynamic indigenous identities, which I will share just now by explaining myself much more. In terms of my ancestral heritage, as I said, I belong to the Bantu indigenous people of Southern Africa. And my father's clan is Gumbo, the people who are referred to Anamajgira Panze, Chitova, Wegona. And my mother's clan is Ziva, people referred to Vanasave, Rizirukuru. So when I'm among my people, they would call me Amagumbo, referring to the daughter of the Gumbos. We tend to take, at least in my clan, our totemic identity from our paternal family. So in this case, I inherit my totemic identity from my father. Hence, I am referred to as Amagumbo. The image you see there, I bring it just to get you to understand where my heritage lies. You will see that is the burial site for my mother and my sister, who are now my ancestors. What is interesting in my case is that I was raised in my maternal rural home, in the sense that my father, once he married, he moved over to my mother's territory. And my grandfather was a chief, and he gave my father land amongst his community. So you will find that amongst my people, we actually tend to speak diverse languages, in the sense that my father, having moved to Buhera, which is my mother's maternal community, he acquired a new language, but he did not necessarily lose his totemic identity, which is Gumbo. Hence, I am still able to take my ancestral identity paternally. Today, I want to talk about the idea of mushamukadzi as a way to frame the discourse that guides the conversation home and away. And I am choosing to talk about mushamukadzi as a way to center how my cultural identity or my indigenous or embodied identity lives and carries me through different spaces. And I find that uh, this conversation is important for me to talk about it because by chance I was working on my research, which is looking at humanizing African women's movements. And in that research, I was predominantly working with Zimbabwean women, which would take me back home between Canada, which would take me home from Canada, going back to Zimbabwe, and I was doing my back and forth. And as I was doing my back and forth in my engagements, I was mostly trying to understand how Zimbabwean women, have been navigating their lives, given that, even though as a country we are no longer under settler colonial rule, we still face remnants of colonialism in the sense of our political system is fractured. Our economic system is not one that sustains everybody equally. So we have deep-seating inequalities that, in a greater sense, have been forged by imperialism. So as I was doing my work and trying to understand how women are finding their way around all this chaos and still able to raise their families, to go about doing the different tasks and duties that they do, and in many instances even carve out a professional career, which would also speak to myself as a Zimbabwean woman who now lives in the diaspora. But even before then, I had managed to carve out my own career whilst I was still on the continent. So in having this conversation, I came to the understanding that the proverb "mushamukadzi" is very central to how women think of themselves and the social responsibility that they carry. But even much more deeply, it is actually an epistemological standpoint that helps to shape the different forms of resistance that women play out both within the domestic space, but also in the public space. And I've found myself then having to lean more closely to it as a way to shape my discourse and how to understand African feminism as a central philosophy in indigenous women's lives. So the image you see there of the heart and two women outside actually depicts part of the work that I have done, which has an exhibition currently on display at York University Tubman Institute. Now, when I did the initial launch of my exhibition, I came across other African women, but also even more importantly, African diaspora women, here in Canada who are actually Zimbabwean. And we started to have more conversations on, Mushamukadzi and how it does not only have meaning when we are home in the sense of our motherland, but also, serves a great, purpose within diaspora spaces in terms of how we navigate, our current realities as immigrants, how we negotiate our space within new territories. So I then, found it meaningful to start a new pathway in terms of my research, trying to tease out what then we can make of Mutamukadzi in diaspora spaces. So as I said in the beginning, I am still really at my initial stages of, seeing how the concept can move across different geographies. And I'm happy to say that there is room for this work, for this framework to make sense here in Canadian context through some of the anecdotal work that I have been doing, which I will share more about. But before I do that, maybe I can give you a bit more of a tease out around what then do I mean by Mushamukadzi, and how it applies as a framework. So as I said, Mushamukadzi is a proverb which draws from the Bantu indigenous knowledge. And as a proverbs, really the direct translation, of course, there are different people who could take another translation of the proverb, but at least as I have been engaging with it, I find that it really literally means a woman is the home. But in some instances, you might find some variations where people would say a woman makes the home, which suggests a sense of creation. But in me saying a woman is the home, I'm actually speaking to a more African feminist grounded interpretation that actually shares the sense that a woman and home are intertwined. And what then is home? So home is the direct translation of Musha. And when you hear me say Musha or home, I'm actually referring to the same term or concept. So whilst we may have, a different interpretation of what home is, for example, if you open the dictionary, it might tell you that a home is a residential area. That means it gives a sense of the existence of a building. But I know in other spaces where people are now looking at home as a concept, they are actually speaking more of it as an embodiment and not necessarily something that is bound within space or place, but rather, goes beyond that. So in my interpretation of the concept, I lean more towards home as just not a place or a space, but rather community. And by extending the idea of home to community, we then are able to plug into African indigenous understanding of community, which is not just, something that is, linked to, for example, when you think of a community and home as interlinked, you might think that when there's a couple of homes, they collectively make the community. Whereas in my ontological, standpoint, community is actually something that we embody in the sense that as an African indigenous person, I am a living being. And as a living being, I'm actually connected to my ancestral community, which are the living dead. And also, I am connected to the future generation, which are the living unborn. And as these living beings, or as the beings, we actually are also connected to a bigger cosmological community, which comprises of the physical and the metaphysical realm, or what we would call the material and the non-material. So collectively, we are actually what makes a community. And when we think about home in this broader sense, then it then helps to understand how, my African cosmology carries me to different spaces and enables me to, to play the critical role that I owe to my community in terms of sustaining harmony amongst ourselves. So home is actually an embodied a realm of peace, of unity, of harmony, and all beings within this home have a critical role to play in sustaining that. But also what you observe in thinking about women is home. You then see how women are central to community. And this places a lot of respect to women as we are communal intertwined to community, but also in the sense that when we think of home as land and women embodying land as they embody home, we find that the ability of women to be productive and produce and nurture their homes is the same role that land plays in nurturing and nourishing us as beings. So women and land are one, and women and home are one in that regard. I can say a little bit more if there's anybody who wants me to revisit the subject. Is probably it's a conceptualization that is not familiar to other people within this North American context. So now that this idea of women and home are intertwined, and women embodies the home, and home is this place of refuge, a place of healing, a place of restoration. How then do we make sense of this within a new territory such as Canada, where in many instances as migrant women, we do not start off in places or positions where we have stability in our lives, and how do we then create home, which is the place and space of refuge, and also come into commune with our greater community as we are displaced from motherland. And what has been interesting, at least in the preliminary work that I've been doing, is that one of the ways in which my African migrant women, and here I'm talking about Zimbabwean migrant women who have found who are here in Canada, whom I have been privileged to talk to, and like I said, anecdotically, is that their connection to land has found a new way of resurfacing, even in diaspora context. And this was interesting for me to observe, in the sense that I, like other women that I'm referring to, we often find ourselves grounded in land, and we ground ourselves in land through agricultural activities that we do. So what happened is that since the at least 4 years that I've been here in Canada, whenever it's summertime, I have to find space to do gardening. And I usually speak to, my other women friends and relatives, greater relatives that are here. We speak much more during that time, sharing ideas on how do we, what can we plant in this space? How do we keep, our African foods as part of our diets when we are here? And in sharing those notes, it became interesting to me that that whole practice in which, women are finding spaces to continue, communing with the land, is in itself part of their practice of sustaining, the idea that Mushamukadzi, a woman is the home and a woman is in commune with the land. So I was fascinated in terms of why would it be important, to do gardening. And the second thing that emerges from this is that in doing gardening, it's actually part of another social responsibility that they are carrying in nurturing and sustaining our cultural values within new territories. And this is not something that is unique or peculiar, but rather interesting for me in that who we are ontologically finds a way to evolve and reinstate itself in new spaces. And there is historical explanation for why women and land have this connection. At least amongst indigenous people, the Bantu indigenous people, at least my people, women have occupied a key role in nurturing the land, as men often occupied their time in spaces outside the homesteads. For example, as hunters and gatherers in the pre-colonial era, indigenous men often spent more time outside the home, leaving women to fend for the family and musha, which is home and land. So working on the land was primarily led by women with the support of other community members in a practice of nimbe, thus placing women in direct control of musha. The cultural connotation that musha mukadzi then posits indigenous women as more knowledgeable about the value of land and what is needed to sustain it and the community. Hence, their being is co-constituted in the land. This was something that I had to revisit in my way of appreciating how we are reconstituting ourselves in new territory and how land becomes an avenue in which we reinvent, and sustain our cultures and our sense of being in new spaces. Even though, we're not necessarily able to practice, for example, Nimbe, where we work collectively to work on a piece of land, I'm finding that Nimbe is still happening in a different way, where this sharing of information around what is it that we could plant within the Canadian context, drawing from our African traditional foods, how then do we do it, even to sharing seeds for some folks who have surplus seeds, where, like in one instance, I remember receiving some seeds from my sister-in-law, which enabled me to plant in that season, and I was able to plant tsunga, which is what we call in this context mustard spinach. So in these conversations that I've been having, what also is interesting to note is by planting the land, women are actually also transferring these skills to their offspring. Like in my case, I have a young daughter whom I've often taken to the garden, giving her the opportunity to till the land and getting her to understand, the different vegetables that we eat and the meaning they have in our life. And in one instance, I even showed her how to roast dry corn, which is also one of our cultural foods. So there is, in a way, a reinvention of our African identities within diaspora context, but also a preservation of who we are. And I find this builds a sense of community, that in itself helps to, work through the different pressures that life brings as people who are in diaspora context, where you have pressure from work, and in some instances, you have other economic challenges and you cannot, meet all your financial needs. But I find that, in one of the instances, through these gardens, women are actually being able to grow, vegetables and their household, dietary needs, to meet their dietary needs, in ways that also enables them in some instances, when they harvest, right? I'll show you in a bit. Um, like one of the images there is actually of okra, which is one of our indigenous foods. And the other image there, it's of magaka eminzwa, which is a type of cucumber. So you find that we're actually able to harvest and store most of these vegetables that we are farming, and we eat them beyond the farming season. And in that sense, you're finding also a deeper sense of commitment to having nutritious meals, something that can be a bit challenging within this Canadian context, where the cost of food is exorbitant. So going back to the idea that mushamukadzi, you get a sense that it's enabling, African diaspora women within this context to ground themselves and, continue to play the roles that they have pride in, as makers of the home, but also as in the embodiment of Musha. So what has also become interesting for me is that, in communing with the land, there has also been a sense of groundedness, because when you're working on the land, you just don't put your plant or seed into the land, but you also commune with the spirit of the land. And in communing with the spirit of the land, we find ourselves enabling, our ancestral community to intimate with us in new territories, and also to connect with the spirits of this land, understanding that there is and has always been other indigenous communities in Canada. And this integration of spirits in itself helps also to bring a sense of unity and harmony amongst ourselves and the environments that we are finding ourselves in. But it also enables us to track back to our roots, as we can speak to our ancestors through our interaction with land. In this photo, I'm also showing, that's my garden and some of my own harvest, which I had in the last planting season. So as a way for me to then wrap up some of the ideas then that I've been playing with, I think that the framing of ourselves as mushamukadzi, and positioning ourselves to play the critical role that we always have embodied as African Indigenous women. It is helping us to renegotiate our space in new territories. It's helping us to to build our sense of belonging in these spaces. And we are actually able to evoke Mushamukadzi, to interweave our experiences across, different geographies, but also across different generations, especially in many instances where we may be first generation women who are actually in the new context. So what I'm also not is that whilst to some extent things such as language, our indigenous language may become a bit suppressed because we don't have probably a bigger community to sustain the language as part of our engagement. What we are not losing and have been able to sustain is our ethos. And part of these ethos is around communitarianism. It's around, the idea of loving and communing with our land, embracing our territories. It's also the idea of humility and the idea of, ensuring sustenance of our generation by passing on the knowledge we have to other generations. And I'm finding that in many instances, I'm always in conversation with other, older Zimbabwean women who've been in Canada for a much longer period than I have. And in doing so, there's a renewed sharing of information, but also sustenance of our cultural values. And through these communities, where we find ways to continue to practice things that are central to our way of being and our lives. We are rethinking new ways of fighting against oppressive practices or a sense of marginalization that tends to persist in most women's lives, but even much worse for African indigenous people or for Black people as visible minorities in Canada. I thank you.
Sorry for sorry for a second. My cursor wasn't working. Thank you very much, Ruth, for your presentation. We are in the question and answer period. So does anybody have any questions for Ruth? I have a question. So when you're doing this research, do you reflect upon like your experiences like with your, I know your ancestors, like your mother's passed on, but do you reflect upon like your experiences with them and how things were at home?
Oh yes, what has been interesting for me, and I always find this as a hilarious thing when I reflect back, is that when I was growing up, I used to witness a lot of my mother, working on the land, and my mother was also a teacher, right? She was an educator, so beyond her formal work, going to work and teaching, she really did extensive farming on our land. And at one point, and I must say also, we had our rural home, which is what I showed earlier on, but we also had another home in the city. And much of when it was school time, we would be in the city. When it's the holiday season, we would be in our rural home. And I remember at one point we went to our rural home, and we were doing a memorialization ceremony for my late sister. And at that point, I think I was probably in grade 9 or something. That would be the equivalent. So my my dad and my mom decided that I'm gonna stay behind with my mom. She needed to finish some work on the land, and he went back, and all my other siblings went back to the city, and I was left behind with my mom. So we were working on the land, and mostly I would go to I would go to the fields with our livestock. That was mostly what she expected me to do. And at some point, I got frustrated that I'm just the only one here, and my other siblings are back in the city. So I then said to my mom one time, she was going to see one of our aunts and get some seedlings for sweet potato. And when she left to go there, I then, in fact, I had devised that it's enough. I want to go back to the city because I'm tired of working. So when my mom left to see my other aunt, I then before she left, I told her, just in case you come back, I'm gonna leave the house keys somewhere there behind that stone. I'll be out at the township to play with other kids. But I already knew I had planned to run away. So when she left, I then ran away and I went back to the city by myself, and which was very risky, given I'd never done it. So when I got home, my dad was surprised that how did you get here by yourself? And then I then literally just told him, well, you kept me waiting. You told me that you'd be back within 4 days, but now it's been 7 days. You've still not come to fetch us. So I just came back to check on you. Why didn't you come back? And then, so there's always a joke around that I ran away from Badza. Basically, I ran away from working on the land, right? And when I look back to it, and now myself here, constantly working on the land and yearning to work on the land, I see how much of what I know I learned from my mother, and how in itself brings so much healing and soothing for me when I think of the losses that I've experienced. So when I'm working in the land, I'm actually communing with my mother, because that is one of the activities I know we did together quite a lot, and it allows me to speak to her through the land, given that I know she is in the land, but also her spirit, lives on amongst us. So it is a form of therapy in that sense, as much as it is a way for me to produce some of the food stuff that is then eaten up by my family. I find that yeah, that's my way to remain connected to the cultural practices that were passed on from my mom, and to memorialize her.
Perfect. Thank you. I also just wanted to point out that the pictures of your like garden or where you're it looks amazing. That all looks amazing. Um, does anybody else have any other questions? Okay. Well, on behalf of myself and the Simcoe County Museum, I'd like to thank you for joining us today, Ruth. I really enjoyed your talk, and yeah, it's always great to hear about how you can connect with your family and how different different cultures do it different ways. I too, um, love to garden. I must admit, though, my mother never gardened, though. So that's something that I learned from somebody else. I do have a comment from somebody, so I'll just read it out. It says, it's from Tracy, and it's thank you for such a thought-provoking and interesting presentation. And that's correct. Thank you so much for your presentation. We really do appreciate it. Thank you. And then
Uh,
hi. And then for everybody else that's still on, we have our next presentation February 19th at 3 p.m. So you can join us for a free virtual presentation with Shannon Orianian, a passionate historian and advocate for Black Canadian heritage. This lecture offers an insightful overview of early Black settlements, the individuals who built them, and the communities that flourished across Canada. So I hope to see you all there. But once again, thank you so much, Ruth, and you have a great day.
All right. Thank you.